a livelihood for the mass of people. I mean, when you're a regular person and you say, what's the point of the economic system? It's, well, to create a good life for everyone, to create a good society.
You would think.
And if we reach a point where there's literally no work for people, then that invalidates like the whole purpose, ostensibly. Because now you're saying, okay, well, was the real purpose just to make a few people really powerful?
Exactly. And that's, I think that would be...
I would argue there's some real truth in that.
I wouldn't localize that in just the economic system, the idea of making a better life for everyone. I think that's more of a society in general thing.
There's a lot of overlapping, but economics is certainly a huge part of people's lives. 9 to 5, you're interacting with the economic system at
what
least.
Is it, 80,000 hours? Is that right?
Right, that's how many hours you work in the average lifetime.
Because to me it seems
certainly
as
a big
though...
chunk of your life.
Really, economics impacts you from every other direction too. Your shopping and even everything. That's
well, and now you're seeing, I mean, even the political system, which is supposed to be kind of a counterbalance to other things. You're supposed to be able to exercise your political system to change some other things.
Right.
That was what
if that gets seized by the economic system.
Well, now we have crony capitalism, where the government's in bed with these big businesses and stuff, and essentially the businesses write laws in order to impede more businesses from being able to come in and compete.
Well, that's kind of the natural development of things, and I mean that's happened all throughout our history.
Here's the only reason why, I think a lot of people have gone down this kind of pathway too, where they see that there was supposed to be the government and the economic system. Those were supposed to be separate, and the government was supposed to keep the economic system in check with laws. Really, it was the big idea. But now the economic system was hey, what if we just pay the people in the government to just do whatever we want, and now there's no laws to constrain us.
Well, this gets back to, in my view, to Cicero. Because the whole thing of so Cicero in Rome talk about how in order to have, he was around when Caesar came to power, and he was talking about how if we could redo Rome, the way I would do it so that the public would survive, is you need to have 3 check and balance powers within the society. You would have democracy, that's one of them. Aristocracy or wealth, that's another. And then monarchy or the government, that's another. And he said you need all 3 of these to have equal power within the society so they check each other. Because each one of them devolves if it's left unchecked. Government turns into tyranny, aristocracy turns into oligarchy, democracy turns into mob rule. And so what we had in America was, very early on, it was tilted in favor of the aristocracy. And as that got really powerful with the industrialization, you have all these big monopolies, government goes, oh shit, they're running away with the society and we need to check them. So starting with Teddy Roosevelt, you had the government get way bigger to try and check corporate power. But then eventually, they had a tug of war one-on-one, which means one of them's going to win, because there's not that third, check to keep it balanced.
Well, the monarchy.
And now you've had the wealth seize control of the majority of the political system.
That monarchy check, I feel is super difficult in kind of our mindset as Americans to have that.
Well, right, but the president, government, but
and I do get the president is supposed to that's supposed to be the monarchy.
And well, see the way the founding fathers drew a lot of inspiration from Cicero, and they talked about. They tried to exemplify those things within institutions. So when Cicero talked about it as the dynamic of power. So rather than there's an institution that represents that power, it's more no. How much power do the people have? How much power does wealth have? How much power does the government have? Holistically, taking into account all the ways that they can influence things.
Totally.
The founding fathers made it so the president was supposed to represent the monarchy in this concept. The Senate was supposed to represent the aristocracy. And remember, at this time, the Senate was not voted. You were selected by government officials. We didn't get to vote on the Senate till 1912 or something like that. And then the House of Representatives was supposed to represent the people, the democracy, because it was way easier to become a member of the House of Representatives. But, I mean, those institutions were not accurate representations of that power within the society. The House of Representatives wasn't a wholly owned expression of the will of the people.
Right.
And so
bunch of white dudes.
Yeah.
At first.
Very quickly, the aristocracy became the most powerful.
The only reason why I was trying to break it down into I can kind of see. I would probably have to read more Cicero for that because I do get.
We didn't get super far into it.
Because how is the monarchy, like, I think the monarchy would probably be more of a, like, societally influential person? I don't know, it's hard. Like, a king gets to do whatever the fuck he wants, really, unless they all decide to revolt.
Well, but this isn't, that's the whole premise, is that monarchy alone would be a king that gets to do whatever he wants. There's a lot of mixed king systems. Like, for example, like when the French Revolution was unfolding, there was the idea for a while that we'd have a constitutional monarchy, where you have a king, but there's a constitution, and he can't violate the constitution. And, you know, the judges and the royalty could, you know, stop him from doing things because he broke the constitutional law. So... Interesting.
So then they also divorce law from that? They divorce law from the government?
What do you mean?
Like, who keeps the... Does the government keep the... this would be... Yeah.
It gets very convoluted. There's all these different checks and then even in the American system you have like that system that was based off Cicero, but then you have the further out checks and balances of like the Supreme Court plus Congress plus the presidency. So it gets really convoluted. But anyway.
I guess from like my main thing is like we see that both like the economic system and government influence each other, and right now it doesn't seem like they're very much separate from each other. Yeah. And so
Which is scary because that's kind of the definition of fascism.
Well, also I feel like it could be also of really any like socialism too.
Well, my personal take on socialism is a libertarian socialism, which is not based in government doing things. It's based in...
No state ownership.
No. It's workers owning and running the businesses themselves. So it's a grassroots socialism.
1913 is when...
Oh, 1 year off.
Were able to be elected in the privacy of a voting booth, at least. So that's according to Senate.gov. Or Senate.gov.
That's so weird that we don't know that. But not until the 1900s did we even vote for our senators.
It is weird.
But anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we know the underlying structure. I think I'm showing that personally right now. All of mine is like mine's like intuitions of like what I've seen, but yeah, I have no idea like where it is that, because the whole idea is like if you have a well-structured system, you can be like, okay, well, what were the goals of the system in the first place? Right here.
It feels to me like you're advocating for a kind of like a merging of the political and economic systems, but in a way that was benevolent.
I'm not advocating for it. I'm saying that that's what's happened, and so
you just want it to exert that power for good.
It's. I mean, I would like to. Yeah, if that's our only option.
Is that your position? Because like my position is that will never happen because that concentration of power is inherently corrupting and self-serving, and so I think it has to be dismantled.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend. I could see that as being the way, but I would also say that like the other way is so that the government is now actually like truly democratic too. So you'd have to
see, but if it's merged with the economic system, I don't think it can be.
Right.
Unless the economic system is democratic. Here we go.
Exactly. Well, if you merged them, then if one was democratic, then the other would have to be democratic too.
Well, one will have to take over the other. I think we had
I don't think that's
a political... I think so, because what we have now is a political system that had democratic aspects to it. I never think it was very democratic. Mm-hmm. And then you have an authoritarian economic system. And if those two things are going to duke it out, one, I think, is going to have influence the other, spread its aspects to the other one. It's going to be the primary role. So I think we've now developed a more authoritarian government because of the influence that our economic system has over the government.
Well, I guess I definitely see that, but I see that through money, right? Like the effect is that the economic system, there's been people who have gotten so wealthy that they are now more influential on our quote unquote democratic government system, right? Than we can be as the actual democracy. And so the way that I would say that is we say that that's a thing, not okay, right? And then you have to use that same channel of law system making to be well, how
do you make laws if the legislature's already captured.
Well, you have to put some way of pressure, right? You would have to pressure them somehow.
What do you think about that, Chris? What do you think? What are your views
Which
on that
aspect?
kind of stuff?
Yeah, you were listening a lot. Just give us a whole.
So
what did all that make you think of?
Well, libertarian socialism was kind of the main.
That's certainly where I'm
thing
coming
that
from.
I could tell, and he mentioned to me that you like Chomsky, so like that.
Oh, love me some Chomsky.
I was expecting that one to come up. Like, I really like the ideas of libertarian socialism. I feel like, and I think this may be where you're coming from, that it's just a little too impractical. Like the structures are already.
That's what a lot of
there,
people think.
And
yeah.
how are you going to convince those people now to just give up all their power and like give all the resources?
Okay, so there's two discussions here. There's what would a system like this look like theoretically, and would it be better? And then there's the tactics of how do you achieve it, how do you get to it. So that's kind of the point you're bringing up.
And like my point is, like, I think that as a system, like a lot of different sort of utopian systems like communism or like pure Austrian system, if you could like have a ground up and like just make this poof out of nowhere, it would work.
Yeah.
But like the idea of getting from where we are now to there is just like so impractical.
Totally.
And there's so many different things that could be corrupted within that process that it could go worse. You know, we could end up in a much worse place trying to move that way. Just like what happens with communism. A lot of people have tried to do communism or, you know, state socialism in a positive way. But like, you know, like even going back to like Russia, you can argue that a lot of the people that pushed for the communist revolution weren't as like corrupt about it as Stalin was. But then Stalin, despite no one wanting Stalin to be there.
Well, and there's a lot of lessons
there.
Right. I mean, I think the core problem there was thinking that any concentration of power could be used for the benefit of society without risk of it being captured.
Right.
So, I mean, I think first and foremost, the first lesson there is the solution has to be decentralized, because we tried a centralized solution and it was immediately captured by authoritarians. So that's kind of like my first basis of my point of view. As far as like ways to get there, so obviously I'd prefer an economy that was entirely democratic, but I understand that the transition to something like that is going to be really tough. So my first idea is to argue for creating a democratic sector within the economy. So I'm aiming for 50% democratic businesses. And then once you have that on its feet, you allow that to compete.
It's a pretty massive jump.
Oh, I know. Obviously, I'm just throwing that out there as like the aspiration.
Okay.
So here's some examples of concrete policies that are being thought of right now to deal with this. So right now, Jeremy Corbyn, who is the opposition leader in Britain, he's the head of the Labour Party. One of his platform positions is to create a democratic sector within the economy of democratic cooperatives. And the way they would facilitate this is they would create a new law that says whenever a business would either sell off a location or go public, they would first have to offer right of first refusal to the employees to buy out the business and run it democratically. And if the employees decide to do it, the government will provide the loan, the startup capital, and informational assistance to facilitate that transition and to become functioning before they pay it back. So that's one idea, and there's a lot of different ideas. Like,
it's
for example,
an interesting idea. The problem is there's no empirical evidence to support that would work, and that when people buy it, it's just like if Walmart.
That the democratic cooperative itself would work.
Well, on a small scale, but I'm saying like let's imagine putting that into practice.
Right.
And let's say that Walmart allow all the employees of Walmart the chance to buy it.
Yeah.
A week later, Walmart is out of business. Okay, like there's just a lot of industries where like the average person has no idea what's happening.
That's
true. The bulk of this company is made of people that are just average, and that's the most industries in the world.
Well, I think that's also part of the system, is it keeps them in that position of averageness. You know what I mean?
Okay, so do you think IQ doesn't exist? If you have someone with a 90
No, I do
IQ,
think it exists.
Okay, so then, like Walmart, the average IQ of a Walmart employee is 90. How are you going to change that system to be to where these people can have a democratic co-op?
In most of these democratic cooperative models, how it works is they're still managers, but you elect your managers.
Right, but the people electing it don't understand what they're electing, so that's how you get Trump. You just get someone saying, "Oh, I'll give you all the bigly wins and you'll get pay raises."
But that's the whole idea of like there's still going to be the impact of the market. So
right, which is what I'm saying. You initiate this, this happens, company collapses, which is why they don't exist in practice and why they need to be subsidized to start with. Because if you try to do this in the real world, it collapses.
There's a lot of examples of it.
On a very small scale.
The seventh largest corporation in Spain is a democratic cooperative.
One company in Spain.
Well, this is the biggest one. It's got, I think, what did it say? It was, I think, over 100,000 employees. So that's the biggest one in the world. It's over 100,000 employees, and it started up all on its own. It didn't have any funding, but it worked for whatever reason. And I mean, it's an absolute insane
what kind of industry
success story. It's a lot of different things. So it's an umbrella corporation. So it's got like
So
manufacturing.
like
it's got
level,
grocery
are we
stores.
talking about like a Google type of people where the average person's got like a 145 IQ?
I have no idea about the IQ.
I think that
of
the-
That's
voice.
very important, though. If we're talking about Google, Google can 100% run a democratic co-op because
Right.
you've got a bunch of geniuses
Yeah.
making a decision. Walmart cannot.
From what he's told me, they have people from like GM and stuff to co.
So they have their own they have their own labs
So-
as part of the corporation, and it's GM and what was the other one? I wrote
Right.
it
So my point is that it works in certain specific incidents, but it doesn't scale across the whole economy because you can't take that same model and apply it to Walmart or the vast majority of industries. You can take an
See,
industry-
but here's another argument: is I would say Walmart shouldn't exist anyway because it's. I mean, I think it's a type of business that is. I mean, we subsidize. It pays its employees so little that we have to subsidize it with public assistance.
sure, but
and
take any other
destroys
business. I
local
just picked
communities.
One random example. I mean, you can pick McDonald's
Amazon
or-
does that too, though.
Huh? Yeah,
Amazon.
Amazon. I mean, pick any company is my point, though, is that, I mean, yeah, there's a big problem with subsidizing, and you can argue that that's part of the issue with the government and the way that those programs are structured
Right.
to start with, but
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean that the model that they're using creates that problem.
Yeah, it might be that there's another solution to that, like the universal income.
Right.
Right.
For
That's
sure.
that's my personal, like, at the moment, I think we still need a lot of discussion with universal income,
Yeah.
but I think that's the direction we really have to move is. And like, well, have you heard of Andrew Yang,
No.
the Democratic candidate? So he's a Democratic candidate for 2020.
Oh, Yang.
Before we get into the universal basic income, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the IQ of running, like the IQ of the average person running some sort of democratic entity.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you confront that problem in the government that we have? Because like most people would say that some sort of democratic
I'd say that's the
governance
problem with our
is-
government. Why we have Trump as president is because the average IQ of an
So-
American isn't that high.
Well,
The issue
but
then is
I mean,
what
he
we
didn't even
do.
get the majority of the votes. So
That's
I mean,
true,
that's
too.
not necessarily representative of a democratic function.
Right, and there's a lot of issues with that whole aspect of the system.
Yeah.
But then you can also argue, tyranny of the majority and the fact that,
True.
population centers tend to be the vote, so they have homogenous.
Okay, well now we're really getting to the thing is, what's better, a kind of a more authoritarian, idealistically a meritocratic system or a democratic system?
So meritocracy
Right.
is what I'm particularly advocating for, not
See-
necessarily authoritarian
Right.
meritocracy.
Right. But I think that's kind of I agree with you, meritocracy, but again, I think meritocracy is one of those things where it looks better on paper than in practice.
But if you stop with meritocracy, just all progress stops. You can't find an example.
Oh, I
of society
agree.
It was like we didn't really care. Like take Genghis Khan. He was the first guy that was just like 100% meritocracy. Now I own half the world. Like it's just effective. You can say
It is
it's
effective,
moral in
but
some ways,
a lot of
you're gonna lose
times-
to the person who's
Yes.
building with that system every time.
I think a lot of times meritocracy is kind of used as a justification for what really is just concentration of power. I think a lot of people.
in some cases.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's an interesting thing is like when you do have a meritocracy, you end up with huge concentrations of power because there are certain individuals that are significantly better than everybody else.
like
For
Elon
whatever
Musk, he just out.
But that power it's not like, you have to go through this rigorous process to determine if you're fit to wield that power. That power passes
Oh.
through families.
Oh well, yeah. Now that's
Yeah.
a big issue: is how much wealth is passed
That's what I
through
was gonna
families.
bring.
That's a
Most
big
wealth
problem.
in this country is passed through
Exactly.
the family structure.
We don't even know where the wealth is.
And that has
because of
nothing
that.
to do with meritocracy.
Yeah.
And it's not like we have a system where people's wealth that they generate is equivalent to their merit or their skill. I mean,
Right.
And the fact that it's getting more and more unequal. I mean, how many people in this country are poor and they're brilliant and they never got a chance in life, So, I mean...
Well, but do you then say, okay, well, we're gonna have everyone take an IQ test, and then
Well,
we're
we do
gonna
that
have
constantly all the time, but
Well, but what I'm saying is we're going to have everyone take an IQ test, and then unless you have this IQ, you don't get to be a manager. Or if you don't get this
See,
IQ,
I'm not into
I
that.
don't know about specific positioning like that. Like I like more of the German system where you can help people find their path as they go.
I love that shit.
Yeah.
But I also worry that that does not solve the problem of families inheriting money.
Oh, for sure.
No, it doesn't.
That's
a
what I'm
whole
saying is
separate
that
problem.
you
Yeah.
because
that's a problem that none of this has addressed. Like, nothing we have said is going to take money from the rich people and help anybody else. That's the whole problem. That's a separate issue.
Okay,
I've not heard a good solution.
Okay,
Yeah, that's hard. Okay. This is kind of like totally off topic, and I really want to get back to democratic cooperatives because I have a ton of shit on that, and I want to go into that eventually. But I had this ram thought the other day of what if you had a progressive tax system that was linked to inequality of wealth itself? So, like, for example, the higher the inequality of wealth is within the society, the steeper the progressive tax system to try and funnel that back into the economy.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
It literally a parity, kind of like if you paired, if you paired minimum wage to inflation.
Right. The biggest problem we still have with taxes, what we just hinted on, is that most wealth is hidden and already
offshore
taxed.
shit
We
and
can't tax this, you know.
Yeah.
So like the richest people are the ones most immune to taxes.
Yeah.
And that's the issue.
Well, they've essentially executed a tax boycott. I mean, that's what they're doing.
Yeah. And every time, and they constantly push in government for their taxes to be reduced so they can trickle down or whatever.
Yeah.
You know,
and now we got to cut public welfare because there's deficit.
Right. It's just crazy. But I mean, it's just that's one of the things where, like, most of the time when we're talking about taxing, even businesses, like, a lot of those costs are getting passed through to consumers and stuff. And like the really wealthy people are just, making bank constantly. And like, we say Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world, right? And that's because we can very clearly document where his money comes in because he has a currently traded public business. But all these people, like the Kennedys and stuff, their money has been hidden so long, we don't know. And like, a lot of people suspect the richest people in the world are actually in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
The princes there
all
could
that
probably...
all that money.
Yeah, there's a legitimate belief that the first trillionaire could exist in Saudi Arabia right now.
See?
Yeah. So that's the big problem is how hidden the real problem is. You know what I mean?
Dude, there's talks with John Kerry talking before Congress saying that Saudi Arabia offered to foot the bill if we toppled Syria and shit like that. Like, they said literally if we did a full-on Iraq-style invasion, they'd be willing to just pay for it.
Damn. That's crazy.
And just use us as the imperial muscle.
Yeah, exactly. They're just like, your whole military are now mercenaries.
I feel like they do use us in a way, and they manipulate us.
They do.
They funded a lot of the terrorism, which they got us to come over there and kill some people they didn't like.
Yeah, both them and Israel have strong lobbies in the United States. For different reasons.
Right, of course, but yeah.
That is terrifying.
The amount of weapons we trade with Saudi Arabia every year, just $1 billion.
Well, right now in Yemen, I mean, we're just essentially helping them commit a genocide.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not even talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a couple senators to put a bill saying we have to stop until Congress says we can do this because it's just totally not spoken of, and they don't even bring it to the floor of Congress. And it's like, wow.
Because people here don't care about it. They want to just have these stupid partisan talking points of like the same arguments that for the past 20 years, the same two.
Well, it's hilarious because I think the scariest things are the places where the two parties agree.
That's fair.
Well,
the two parties. There's a consensus on war. There's a consensus on corporatism. That all these a lot of the really shitty stuff, they're in agreement that they don't.
Everybody loves Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. How do you vote against Goldman Sachs in the American political system?
Yeah, like Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders, like the only people I've ever seen that.
That's it.
That's insane.
That is.
So universal healthcare. We were talking. I mean, not
Universal
healthcare. Income.
Co-ops.
Should we start with co-ops or universal income?
Well, go ahead and go with democratic co-ops since we've touched it more first.
Okay.
Finish the conversation.
So, oh man, I don't even know where to start. There's so much. Okay, so the basic premise is the idea that you're looking for a solution to an alternative to the hierarchical, concentrated power aspect of capitalism.
Right.
So what is an alternative economic system that can work that way? So we're talking about the theory as opposed to the implementation, okay? So in terms of the theory of democratic cooperatives, there's a lot of research on democratic.
Let me stop you one
go ahead.
second.
Yeah.
You're using the term democratic cooperative. Cooperative, I think is what I'm thinking of is just a generic version of cooperative. It has a lot of different, like worker cooperative.
Okay, so there's
what I'm thinking.
there's
you have
two
a specific definition that's different than cooperative.
Yes, and this is part of the economic research on this subject too. Is that there's a distinction between cooperatives. So a lot of cooperatives are just collectively owned by the workers, so they all have part of the shares. So for example, I don't necessarily want to say which one on the podcast, but I'm employed at a employee-owned business.
Yeah.
But I have no say in anything that's done. So there's a difference between worker-owned and worker-directed. A worker-directed cooperative or a democratic cooperative is one where the workers have say in how the business acts.
I need you to delineate that a little more, because if the workers already own the business,
Right.
how are they not running it?
Right. Okay. So, for example, the business I'm part of, all workers own shares in the business, but the number of shares you have changes based off how long you've worked there and the position you hold. So the higher you ascend the hierarchy, the higher the percentage of shares you have. There's still a very clear management hierarchy. You have no say in decision making. Theoretically,
So you're saying it's got a meritocracy in it, where you actually have to prove you're competent.
Yeah, based
you
off
get equal
whatever criteria is already in place.
which
Yeah,
is the success of the company. So yeah.
sure. Okay. So yeah, it's a hierarchical system. An average employee has no say over anything that's done. They're just an employee like any other random business. The only difference is that they're going to get some stock options.
They don't have any. It's not that they don't have any, because if you go on 1% and there's a vote and it's 49-40 or 50-50 basically.
Yeah,
you have
so
1%. You could be the deciding
you could
It's just
you
that
know
you have less
get
of a percentage of
yeah.
the vote than the people.
in practice, it comes out to where the average employee never impacts the decisions that are made.
Right.
Just because
Which I would
some
say
people-
is a good thing, because the average employee doesn't know how the hell to run a business.
See, and this is where you and I are going to disagree.
So,
And I say all evidence though is on my side of that. Like, the average person doesn't know how to run a business.
Well, we'll get into that.
You're in a utopian state.
I very much agree that in the way society is currently constructed, that's the case. Because
Well, how would you reconstruct society in order for everyone?
yeah,
to be able to
so
do that?
okay, for
Let
example,
him finish.
I mean, the way our education system is structured right now is primarily oriented around creating workers that are going to function well within a capitalist economy, which generally means you're going to be good at following directions. You know, that's why our education system is very much around like following directions, taking tests, all these different things. If you have an education system within a economy that's based on democratic participation in the workplace, it's going to be very different. It's going to be based around the kinds of skills you need to operate in a democratic environment. And that also would present the possibility of a reciprocal relationship with the needs you would have as a democratic citizen in the political system, which I think is another huge point, because we don't empower people in this society to be effective democratic citizens in the political system because they're being trained how to be good capitalist workers. So if you have a democratic economy, those can be reciprocal. You're empowering people, both within the fact that they have a democratic community in their workplace, which can serve as a foundation for democratic activism in the society as a whole, but you're also training them with all the things they need to be effective democratic citizens.
So let me just jump in for 1 second and say that then would you agree with Chris that it's probably not practical right now to implement a democratic co-op system where everyone has equal voting?
Right. I do agree with that. I think it's
Okay.
something that has to be